On the same date every year, my ex and I meet up to go camping, and every time it ends up with the best sex of my life. The date is coming up. Very long. Some years ago, I decided to go alone on a beautiful 2-day hike a few hours away from where I lived. I decided to do it because I wanted to challenge myself, as I hadn't really done much on my own at that age and highly dependent on other people. If you're familiar with the route and in good shape, you can complete it in 1 day, but due to me getting lost and stopping to enjoy the scenery, I had to set up camp twice. A couple of years later, I met a girl that I fell in love with instantly. I hadn't been with anyone before, so to me, she was extra special, and within 6 months of meeting each other, we moved in together. After being together for a little over a year and a half, I took her to the same trail that I hiked alone years earlier, and we had an amazing time. We didn't rush it, but because I knew the route, we finished late on the second day. The year after, and on the same date, we walked the trail again. Due to some bad weather, we had to set up camp twice. Even though that year wasn't as good as the first, we enjoyed it a lot. Third year of being together, things wasn't as good as the previous years. I could feel something was wrong in our relationship, but it being my first relationship, I didn't know it had run its course. In an attempt to bring back the spark, I suggested we should do the trip a third time, and she agreed. We had a good time, but it just wasn't the same. A little bit after this, I ended the relationship because I could tell she wasn't happy. Or I thought she wasn't happy. The next few months absolutely sucked for me. I decided to go no contact because talking to her would be too hard. I still loved her very much. I struggled a lot for about 8 months. I quit my job, I moved back in with my parents, and I isolated myself completely. I quit doing anything that reminded myself of her. We used to watch TV shows together, play games on my Nintendo. We cooked together and had our favorite recipes. I stopped doing all of this. I couldn't even go back to dating. Even flirting with girls felt wrong. I was absolutely miserable, so in an attempt to get my shit back together, I thought it'd be a good idea to reintroduce myself to the things we did and make them my own. I cooked our favorite meal. I watched the last season of Game of Thrones, and I invited a friend over to play Mario Kart. It was depressing at first, but after a bit I managed to enjoy doing it without her. Thinking I was getting over her, I figured I should go on our hike once again alone, just like I did the first time. It was the ultimate symbolic nail in the coffin of our relationship. My plan was to start dating again after this trip, and I knew exactly who I was going to ask out. The day came for the trip, and I was getting ready. I was excited but a little bit depressed as well. I felt butterflies in my stomach and a little bit nauseous. I was shaking more and more the closer I got to the parking site. I arrived late in the day as my sleep schedule had been rather out of sync for a very long time. Once I got my gear out of the car, I debated not doing the trip at all. It didn't feel right somehow. After thinking about it for some time, I decided to do it. I had to do it. I didn't enjoy it at first, but it was a beautiful day, so I came to enjoy it after the first hour or so. I was getting hungry, so I looked for a spot to camp for the night. After eating and thinking for a little bit, I decided to walk a little longer. I remember the first camping spot my ex and I used, and it was only a 25-minute walk or so. Once I got there, I spotted another tent in the exact same spot as we were in the first time. I tried to look around for a person, but there I couldn't see or hear anyone. I set up my tent not too far away, but not too close either, so they wouldn't feel creeped out. I sat outside with a fire enjoying the dusk. It was getting dark when I heard the neighbor talking on the phone. It was a girl, and her voice was so recognizable I freezed up for about a minute. I tried to listen to what she said, but I couldn't make it out. I was 90% sure it was her, but it had been a long time. She didn't talk after that, so I guess she fell asleep. I, on the other hand, could not sleep at all. I was still using the same tent my ex and I used when we went together. I hoped she would recognize it in the morning, but to make sure I left my sweater outside that I'd had for years. When I woke up the next morning, I had hardly slept at all. My entire body screamed for me to look outside and see if the neighbor tent was still there. When I finally did, I saw that it wasn't. I got out, ready to eat my breakfast, and then I saw her. It was really her. She waved at me, and after a few seconds I waved back. She came over towards me and said hello. I asked her why she was there, and she told me she enjoyed the hike so much she wanted to do it again. I asked her if she was with anyone, and she said no, it was just her. I remember thinking it was a little odd, as she'd always been a little scared at night when we were together. I couldn't imagine her ever going alone. I was also very shocked to even see her again. I can barely remember what happened just after that, but I remember eating my breakfast and sharing some of my cookies with her. She showed me her new tattoo, and told me she was planning to get more. I never took her for a tattoo person. She had changed so much, but she still had the same personality. For the rest of the way, we walked together. We talked and we laughed. Eventually, we made it to the second camping spot and we set up our tents. We got ready to eat and compared our foods. I brought muddy spaghetti and she had stale, crisp bread, not exactly sure what it's called in English, and liver pate. She looked a little disappointed, so I asked her if we could switch because my stomach hurt a little bit and I didn't feel like eating spaghetti. She didn't accept at first, but after some convincing, she happily accepted my offer. It was getting late, so we decided to head to bed. I was crazy tired after walking all day, so I fell asleep almost immediately. Sometimes during the night, I woke up and heard her coming into my tent. She told me she was hearing some scary sounds. I told her I couldn't hear anything. She mumbled something for a bit and then asked me if she could sleep in my tent with me. I was half asleep but somehow managed to move my stuff around enough to make room for her. She brought her sleeping bag and got inside. I was just about to fall asleep when I heard her taking her clothes off, and suddenly I was wide awake. She never enjoyed sleeping with her clothes on, so I knew she was naked. She also made sure to leave her bra between our sleeping bags so I could get a good look on it. It took some discipline to fall back asleep, but eventually I managed to do it. When I woke up the following morning, she was still sleeping and I was spooning her. I had set up my tent with a little bit of an incline, so sometimes during the night she must have inched closer and closer to me. After so many months of not being with someone, lying this closer and knowing she was naked in her sleeping bag made me extremely horny. I almost came right there in the sleeping bag. I decided to go out and rub one out in the woods, but the action of getting out of my sleeping bag woke her up. I told her I was going out to pee, but I don't think I hid my boner well enough. I got out and realized I really had to pee, so I stood by the trees for a few minutes waiting for it to calm down enough to let the water out. It was close to impossible, but eventually I managed to do it. Having been out there for a good few minutes, I heard her yelling at me, asking what was taking so long. I just said I really had to pee. She told me to come back, but I knew I wouldn't be able to walk all day this horny. She yelled again, so I went back inside. She was still in her sleeping bag, still mostly naked, but she had put on a thin but still see-through sweater. She sat up straight and zipped down her sleeping bag and gave me a good long look at her boobs. I swear I almost passed out from blood loss. I couldn't hold myself back, so I kissed her. She kissed me back, and within seconds we were both naked on her sleeping bag having sex. We had sex twice, and to this day, it's some of the best sex of my life. For the rest of the trip, we were back to our old selves, exactly how we were before the relationship took a bad turn. It felt amazing, and I don't think I've ever been happier. When the trip ended, we hung around for a bit, but eventually got back in our cars and drove off. When I got home, I unblocked her on Facebook and looked through her profile. Sadly, I noticed a guy she had introduced me to at the end of our relationship in some of her pictures. I asked my friend, and he said they got together a few weeks after we ended it. I'm not sure if she cheated on me or if she just acted weird because she developed feelings for the guy, but I fell back into the same depression I developed after our breakup. It didn't last as long, but it took much more from me to get out of it. I also learned from our mutual friend that he was the reason she got into tattoos, and that they only dated a few months, and that she was the one that ended it. I wanted to contact her, but after some time and rational consideration, I decided not to. After some time, I met a new girl. She was amazing, and I enjoyed her company a lot. I realized that I didn't love her, but I clinged onto her to not be alone, I think. We dated for a few months, but I couldn't get serious with her. I believe she was in love with me, so I couldn't bring myself to end it. My yearly hiking trip date was coming up. I debated going, but I knew I wouldn't be able to keep myself from going just in case my ex did. I packed my stuff and left for the hike. I got there early and waited in my car to see if she showed up. I sat in my car for 2 hours just waiting when I finally saw a car arriving. Sure enough, it was her, but the car was new. I waved at her, and she smiled and waved back. We caught up and I told her I had a girlfriend. She looked a little disappointed, but she was happy for me. She did ask if I minded us sharing a tent so she didn't have to carry hers, and stupidly enough I agreed. We started the hike, and we had a good time. It was not the same as the previous year. It got a little awkward at times, but it was fun. The first night was tough. She once again got naked in her sleeping bag and I was horny as hell. My girlfriend and I did not have good sex. It was boring, and I prioritized masturbating over having sex with her most of the times. That night, I got out to masturbate 2 times, and I was still horny when trying to fall asleep. The next morning, she woke me up saying she was ready to eat. When I finally managed to open my eyes and look at her, she unzipped her sleeping bag, showing me her fully naked body. We kissed and touched each other for a little bit, but I broke it off before anything really happened. I had no idea where that strength came from, but I didn't want to cheat on my current girlfriend. We ate breakfast and after a quick bathroom break away from each other, yep, I masturbated, set off for the last part of the trail. Things got weird, and we decided to walk the rest of the way over camping another night. We got to the end and said our goodbyes, and immediately I regretted finishing the hike so early. I stopped her from leaving and invited her to talk for a bit. We sat on a bench and talked. I told her I wasn't happy with my girlfriend, and she helped me a good bit. I realized I had to break up with her. By the end, we kissed and touched each other some more. I fingered her for some time and she blew me. She ended it there and we went our separate ways. First thing I did after coming home was to break up with my girlfriend. She cried for a bit, but took it surprisingly well. I talked a little bit with my ex after that, but nothing really came out of it. I was so into her, almost obsessed. After some time, I blocked her again. She didn't really return my messages, so I left it at that. Eventually, I had mostly forgotten about her. I had some random hookups, but nothing that really lasted. The date was getting closer, and I started thinking about her again. If I went, would she be there? I was happy and sad. I wasn't in love with her anymore, or not like I used to at least. My feelings for her was confusing. The date was coming up, and I made sure to take the Friday off from work in good time, but the day before they called me and said I had to come in. I decided not to go on the hike, even though I was all packed and ready. When the morning came, I got up and ready for work. In the shower, I suddenly felt really sad and depressed. I called work and told them I couldn't come in. They said it was fine and that the guy who called off was coming anyway. I hurried up and packed my camping gear into my car and drove towards the hiking trail faster than I've driven before in my life. I was super excited to get there and scared she wouldn't be there at the same time. I had no idea if she'd be there or not. I hadn't asked around what she was up to or looked at her Facebook at all. That made it even more exciting and scary. Only stop I made along the way was to buy the most optimistic condoms and lube I've ever bought. Eventually, after some delays, I made it to the trail parking spot. I drove around looking with my pulse going crazy. It was taking forever even though the parking spot is really small. I spotted a familiar car, and sure enough, there she was. She was glowing and smiling wider than I've ever seen her before. She looked so happy. I got out and gave her a hug. It felt so good to just stand there and hug her. We hugged for probably 5 minutes, but it felt like it's only been 10 seconds. I could not get enough of her. We set off once again, with only one tent. I had brought a comfy inflatable mattress, pillows and blankets this time, so she didn't even bring her sleeping bag. We didn't get far, not even the usual camping spot before we were all over each other. The spot was terrible, but we quickly set up the mattress and blankets, not even caring about the tent. The spot was fully visible from the trail, but we didn't care at all. She got naked, I got naked, and we had amazing sex for what felt like hours. I was more drained after that than I've ever been hiking this trip before. We set up camp and stayed there for the length of our trip. There was a small lake nearby that we skinny dipped in twice a day. The second night she even agreed to try anal, even though we never did it before. We stayed there for 3 days and only ended the trip because we ran out of food and snacks. We had sex one more time in the car before we called it. We decided to end it with a decent meal at a nice restaurant. Coincidentally, she met one of her friends there. She seemed nice, but also a little confused as to why I was there. Maybe she knew I was her ex or something. I don't know. Now, as it turns out, this trip was almost a year ago. I haven't talked with her since, but I've thought about her every day since that. I'm pretty sure I'm in love with her. More so than any other girl I've been with. I can't get her out of my head, especially now as the date is coming up in a few months. This year I've heard rumors that she's getting married, but I haven't had the guts to ask around. My friends probably know, but don't really care enough about her to even tell me. I don't know if I should go this year, but I know for sure I won't be able to stop myself. I haven't even checked if she has a boyfriend. What I do know is that she's definitely going. My only friend who knows about it sent me a screenshot of her status saying how much she's looking forward to her yearly hiking trip, and I got a text badly disguised as an advertisement for the hiking trip that exact day. It included stuff like mountain with sexy scenes, hot nights, bring protection from wet weather and cat attacks. I also get photos of her in camping gear that gets increasingly sluttier. She's down to a see-through fishnet sweater with her nipples covered up and no underwear. I'm madly in love with this girl, even though we only meet once a year. We have amazing chemistry and have so much fun the days we meet. I'm not doing myself any favors to myself meeting her like this. I doubt I'll ever find someone else if I keep doing it. It's not right to do it if she's serious with someone else either. I don't know what I should do, but I damn well know what I am going to do anyway. Follow or subscribe.